So Joe Biden had recently called on Congress to impose term limits on the Supreme Court. Term limits on the Supreme Court and a code of conduct on the Supreme Court, while also drafting limits on presidential immunity. All three of these things are pretty good. A code of conduct on the Supreme Court, Congress have to pass it. Supreme Court will have to check it that it's constitutional, and then also drafting limits on presidential immunity. We need limits on presidential immunity. Any official acts. So if there was an official act about SEAL Team 7, you have the Navy, you have the president who goes and does an official act on a political opponent. That's going to be covered. Any official act. So I can think of a bunch of official acts that were really fucked up: apartheid, slavery, genocide, Native Americans, Japanese Americans. There's a bunch of fucked up official, everything Hitler did was official. So these are great. I'll just talk about the 18-year term limit, the code of conduct. I just don't see it going anywhere. The limits on presidential immunity, they need to be drawn out. The president could just do whatever the hell he wants to do, just go into Starbucks and poop all over the barista. I don't want them doing that. And if they did that, I don't want that, presidential immunity. I feel like, to me, if their intentions was to do something for the country, somehow Starbucks has been, doing the genocide, if that's what the point is, well, then that's different now, isn't it? So when it comes to the term limits, I think this is a great idea for a couple reasons. For one thing, the reason why we have the Supreme Court and the way that they have lifetime appointments is they have to stay in there during good behavior, and that's the only limitations. So the idea is you get in there at, say, 50 years old, 76 is the average lifespan, so you got 26 years. You have 26 years to figure out whatever it is, that as a Supreme Court justice, how you're going to. So you got 26 years to be a Supreme Court justice, to weigh in on the Constitution and weigh in on these matters, to appeal whatever decisions need to be appealed. That's a long time. 26 years, because you have such a long time that when you are actually out there being a Supreme Court justice, you're not worried about the public sentiment. You're not worried about the mob. You're not worried about anything at all. You got this position until you die. So you're just going to say what you think without any political considerations. And so it's almost like absolute authority. It's almost like they got some kind of immunity themselves. FDR had tried to do something with packing the court. So I think that Supreme Court reform is almost as, hard and tough as like Second Amendment reform. What I like about the thing, not only do I like the idea itself, 18-year term limit, I think term limits are a good idea. 18 years, you still have the freedom to make your own decisions, at least for 15 years. If you're, 3 years, you're going to step down, then maybe your opinions might change. But 18 years, you're in there for 15 years, you're going to make whatever decisions you would have made, before the 18-year term limit was put into place. So it doesn't really change things too much. 18 years, that's a long fucking time. So, I just made if you get in there by 50, 18 years, you might not even serve your full 18 years. But another reason why I really like this is because it introduces the amendment process. There's so many things that America needs, and because our Constitution is written in a certain way, you can't do it unless there's an amendment. And so I like that the amendment process is being brought out. The amendment process, it's almost impossible, right? If you're like, well, we can't do this, we can't do that. Well, let's try to do an amendment. Well, you're saying it's not even possible. In order to get an amendment passed, you have to have 2/3 of Congress approve of the thing, and then you have to have 2/3 of the states approve of it as well. Or 3/4, some supermajority of Congress, and then a supermajority of the United States. And so once you get the supermajority of Congress to put it on the ballot as a referendum so the people of America could vote for it, and then you get the, not majority, but supermajority, 3/4 of the American people to vote for it. You can do it by conventions too, and that's, by the people. Technically, it's by the people of that state, the delegates. So you can either put it on the ballot by Congress or by convention, and then you get it passed by election, by referendum, by initiative, by the people going and voting on whether or not they think an 18-year term limit is a good idea. The last time, the 27th Amendment, I think that was, 1992? The 27th Amendment was passed 1992. It was actually one of the original 12 that was introduced back in 1789. But it was 1992. So 1992 is the last time we've had an amendment passed. When I was 10 years old, so in my entire lifetime, I've never voted on an amendment. And then 1992, I guess there was never on the amendment. So 1992, 8 years plus, so that's 32 years. This country, we only changed the thing 27 times, and in the last 30-something years, 32 years, we haven't changed it at all. So I like the idea. DeSantis had a couple remarks. I'll just go ahead and play these remarks so we can.
We have a mandatory retirement age.
This is what DeSantis says about the same idea. The 18-year term limits.
So here's the thing. Honestly, on the 18-year term limit for justice, so founders, if you go back and read the founders, they said you're going to serve during good behavior, which basically meant lifetime appointment unless you did something to get you impeached and removed from office. And they thought that was important because they wanted the judiciary to be insulated from the passions of the day. That enforcing the Constitution when it's popular to do so is not that big of a deal. You just follow the wind. It's tough when enforcing the Constitution cuts against the currents of public opinion. And so they wanted to insulate them from having to even worry about it. So something like a retention election would not make sense as the founders understood it. Florida's Constitution is not really the people that framed that were not necessarily in sync with our founding fathers when they did the U.S. Constitution. So the whole idea of retention election is undercuts what the founders wanted to do on that. Age limits, if you're going to do it for everybody in office. If you want to do 75, don't just apply it to justices, apply it to Congress, apply it to the executive. If you're going to do that, that would be one thing. But I don't see how you could say, so an 18-year limit, you'd serve for 18.
So he's going to later on say the only way that he would agree to a term limit for the judiciary is if Congress agrees for term limits on themselves. And you know what? That's a great idea, too. So Congress, they have been in there for decades. Supreme Court's in there for decades. All of our politicians are super fucking crusty and old as shit. And it's kind of ridiculous. So you get in office back in 1950 and then you get to stay in office forever and ever. That's not a healthy democracy. A healthy democracy, we'd be kicking these bums out and putting new people in, but what happens is people get entrenched, and then they use the incumbency bias. They already have the party bosses and the donations and the coffers, and so once they already got the power, it's just easier to keep them in power than it is to try to elect somebody new. If we had a healthy democracy, then we would be primarying, our own parties all the time, because we need to purify the thing, to make it better, just to change, just to evolve, just to give this person a chance, and then, the House of Reps, that's only 2 years, so then give that person a chance. It's just a 2-year break, a 2-year hiatus. You could go right back to the... But that's not how our democracy works. You get in there once, and then you stay in there for 50 fucking years, and so it's almost like none of them. Only the president, out of the 3 branches of government, only the president, it has to stay. If it's 8 years is enough time for George Washington, I think it's enough time for pretty much the senators, representatives, Supreme Court justices. Maybe a little bit more. Maybe, I think 18 years it's a huge number. That's a huge fucking number. So 18 years, I have no fucking problems with that at all. If you get closer, 4-year term limit, now hold on, you're not really insulating them from shit. 18-year term limit, you are insulating them substantially. So I agree with Ron DeSantis that Congress needs term limits. So I agree with him. I'd be for both of those. Term limits for Congress and term limits for the Supreme Court SCOTUS.